Hi, I'm Phil Kurz, contributing editor at TV Tech Magazine and TVTech.com. We're here today to talk about data security, strategies for resiliency, and disaster recovery. Joining me are Jonathan Solomon, a 30-year industry veteran. His many accomplishments include leading an initiative at World Wrestling Entertainment to transition its traditional broadcast infrastructure to a secure, high performance digital platform. Lee Whitcomb, a 30-year plus industry veteran, SMPTE fellow, and active participant in standards committees of multiple industry organizations. He holds several patents in the areas of networking and timing, as well as synchronization. And Skip Levins, head of product marketing, AI strategy at Quantum, which is sponsoring today's webinar. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. We will be taking your questions throughout today's webinar. Please submit them using the Q&A tab in the upper right of the web interface. Also, you'll find the links and other useful information under the Docs tab. I encourage you to download them. With all that said, gentlemen, thanks for being here. Let's get started.
Excellent.
Let's start off with Jonathan. Jonathan, when you think about data security for the media and entertainment industry in general, and broadcast in particular, what do you see as the buckets or silos of vulnerability? And I guess maybe they match up with some of the workflows that are commonly employed.
Yeah, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. M&E has traditionally been broadcast, media, and IT. And so you haven't had that mix of knowledge. The broadcast folks understood broadcast workflows. Conceptually, we'll think SDI, right? And the IT folks focused on IT workloads, email, web browsing, logins. And today we're seeing more of those overlap and cross-management among them, but each department is still often isolated. At the basic level, this is a cost issue, right? So you have your promotions department, for example, who using an Adobe suite, and your edit department using an Adobe suite, and they're two separate Adobe accounts. And so just at the very basic level, right, that's a concern. But from a security perspective, you also have everybody managing those accounts separately. So you have promos might be able to share externally, which they should be able to do, but editorial should not be, but that's a default, so we're just going to leave it. When you start to combine all of those under a broadcast IT management, where you have a combined IT group and broadcast group looking wholly at the entire system, you can break those silos up. And before without combining them, you do have those vulnerabilities, and everyone seems to manage their own products, their own connectivity, sometimes their own literal connectivity to the outside world, the internet connection. And someone might say, oh, I need a separate one for my EAS encoder, for example. And they maybe you do need to have two, but everyone would benefit from having a combined system. And so those silos today are starting to merge, but you're still having that fight against, sometimes it's corporate IT that oversees maybe a station group, and your broadcast engineers in the smaller group, and there's always the bickering between the two. So that's where we are today, but I do see a future where it's more integrated and everybody's cross-skilling. You have your broadcast engineers understanding the IT workflows and the level 1, level 2 troubleshooting, and your IT folks understanding media workflows so they can relate to what's going on.
Skip, Jonathan just brought up the idea of these various vulnerabilities, and that we have the front office or the back office. We have the workflows that are involved with actually creating content, putting it on the air, streaming it, whatever it happens to be. Do you see the front office systems or the back office systems creating security risks to the most vital things that media companies do, which is produce and distribute content?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Jonathan really kind of nailed it. I mean, there's always this sort of, front office, and what are they doing? They're selling ads, which means they're outbound, they're talking, they're, and they're on one set of systems, and then, and obviously they're under the gun to like sell ads and, get back to customers. And then on the production side, talk about deadline driven. They too are like, look, we're totally under the gun, and they tend to be separate. And like in the past, what we'll do, because we're looking at the whole workflow, we'll say, okay, here's one camp saying the word data, and another camp talking content. And a lot of, it used to be oil and water. But in every organization trying to get more agile and how do I combine the best of these different resources, this is definitely starting to merge. But I will say, and I'm sure we'll dig into this later, a lot of times, in the content side, it tended to be very insular. And for example, you're working on a big feature film, like you have pretty good, not quite military grade, but pretty good control, of what goes in and out of your facility. But I think this approach company-wide is like, let's really think about all the different layers of security. So yes, it's been oil and water, but I think exactly as Jonathan said, blending them now into what's a smart, agile, responsive, total workflow is where it's going.
Lee, how do you see it, especially given your take on security most recently, which has involved some of the timing and synchronization issues that are vital to an IP infrastructure? How do you see this? Do these sales folks that are out in the field and coming back pose a risk to the larger system, or those systems, should they be kept separate? How is this all playing out?
Yeah, so I mean, in the past we had very separate our essence, our video and audio, and we had our management network for controlling the devices. And these used to be very separated, and now they're becoming much more merged and connected. So as things become more integrated, it allows for more capabilities and features, but unfortunately it does open up more ways to attack the system. And then sort of combined with that, we also have our timing system. So keeping everything synchronized, which is sort of part of the essence flow, but it is sort of a separate component.
I wanted to remind our audience members who are watching that if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them with the at the Q&A tab. Jonathan, is the industry taking the vulnerabilities that are out there serious enough from your perspective?
No, I mean that's it's not even a short answer, right? It's a long answer. In Skip mentioned studio productions, and there is some acknowledgement on the biggest studios that this is a risk, and because we've seen those when that content's been exposed before it's supposed to be released. There's been several where you have pre-release content come out and it could affect sales, right? And I'll come back to that in a minute. But generally speaking, most people in the industry don't. Most companies in the industry try. The bigger station groups really are focusing at an IT level to do it. But it comes down to people. The vulnerability is a person. So we were talking in the pre-call. You can have hardened systems all you want, and you can have exception-based monitoring of your systems. You can have all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, it takes one person who falls for a phishing email or a text, or has a lazy password, or uses the same password on Netflix, and there's a Netflix conflict, or on their medical accounts, and there's medical accounts are compromised. The last couple of weeks, we've seen a few of those bigger companies. That's all it takes to get someone to penetrate the system, to have a vulnerability. And so it is it's a combination of the IT policies and the systems in play and the people. There's when I was at WWE many years ago, we went through some audit, and we can talk about audits later. Those are fun. And we had a problem because we couldn't turn off the USB ports because we had USB keys for some of our software. Yeah. And so the concern was, what if someone came in with a USB drive or a hard drive and took all the content, and even if they just kept it for themselves, there's risk there. And so we had a very, very low tech solution. We super glued all the unused USB ports. And why did we do that? It was because we had so many people coming in and out of these suites, and it's a trust but verify, right? We trusted that these people wouldn't do anything, but how do we verify they didn't? And so that was, in hindsight, was that the best solution? Probably not, but it was a solution. And the people in general don't think about security until they're affected. You want to find someone, an employee who's really good at security. They're the one that's had their identity stolen. They're the one that's had their credit card account compromised and has to spend time dealing with that. The people who haven't had that experience yet, and so it's not tangible to them on that loss. And at the end of the day, it's not a matter of if there's going to be a compromise; it's a matter of when. We'll talk about DR later, but it's. I don't think people are taking it seriously, and it's hard to. Personally, I mean, just looking at myself, I have risk reward for me is for my own house. Ease is better than complicated. I have 4 kids. I'm married. My Wi-Fi passwords are really simple because when people come over, I can't give them a 20-character alphanumeric with a pound sign exclamation point. Like, it's just not going to work. We have a lot of shared accounts. So we have simple passwords on accounts. You know what? If someone gets into our family Google Calendar, hopefully they come and join us at our swim team and root us on, right? So there's a risk reward there, right? But all this stuff around financials, those are all, more serious passwords. And you can take that and apply that to this industry as well. Anything that is mission critical, limited access, rotating passwords, all of that, all of those things are great. Public website, I mean, you want to manage a public website. We're not getting into that, but publicly available information, schedule downloads, things like that. If it gets out in the wild, people maybe they'll see a schedule and want to watch something. So that risk reward. But boy, the vulnerabilities are out there. There's a lot of you don't want to know how the sausage is made type of stuff. There's a lot of I don't want to say dark web that really puts a bad vision in people's heads, but there's a lot of dark web type stuff going on, and you just don't know about it. And it's just a matter of when that critical time comes that someone gets in and can take you offline, give you ransomware, or put up something on your graphic system that isn't supposed to be there. So those are all real things that have happened. Skip, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's so in the past, so you took the step of hot gluing USB ports, but in a production environment, people are moving stuff in and out all the time, and it used to be one of the things you had to teach people about was like, don't pick up USB sticks. Don't use someone else's cable, because I can show you 2 USB cables and people go, wow, that's $40. But they're indistinguishable from each other. One has a chip with a keylogger, and that's enough for someone just to capture what's happening in a keyboard. That's enough for them to figure out username and passwords when they grab that cable back. So that's the hardware side, and then the other thing is AI and the you mentioned social engineering. The AI attack space is, I mean, like it's like in a matter of minutes, I can take someone's voice, create a highly believable clone of that voice, and make it say anything. So, you're used to the messaging, where your CEO suddenly says, I need you to authorize this $1 million check. And you go, okay, boss. That's the thing of the past. Next, it's going to be a face call, a FaceTime call that looks exactly like your CEO. So I think we're all hinting at this sort of, what's the answer? Layered defense, regular sets of, overlapping and continuous protection, because there is no one thing that defends against everything.
Lee, how do you see it? Is the industry taking the vulnerability seriously enough, or is there still room for improvement?
I think there's room for improvement. I mean, it's as more and more people are getting attacked, and as you say, if it's happened to you, you take it much more seriously. So it's getting more and more, and you hear more and more in the news about, oh, this ransomware happened, this attack happened. So I think it is slowly becoming more serious, but in the past, it was, I think, a lot of, we just need to be on air. We want to keep things nice and simple. And security does add extra two-factor authentication. I got to take my phone and get the second password or whatever key code and stuff. And it's just, if things become too troublesome, people don't use it. So you have to make sure that it's nice and simple, but gives us that level of security.
Well, while you're on the,
Post-its
I'm sorry,
everywhere,
go right
written
ahead.
down passwords are usually, what happens there, Lee, when people, it's too onerous, and then people go back to, Post-its, on their keyboard kind of thing.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you,
Exactly.
Lee, to continue on. You're talking about keeping it simple, but what are some of the key best practices that you recommend as a place to start for those who are developing a security strategy?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, I mean, we sometimes think about the broadcast industry as somehow special or unique, but it really isn't. So if you just follow your sort of general IT best practices on strong passwords, use secure shells and secure logins and stuff. So if you just sort of follow just the basics, and if you do kind of like follow the basics, that gets you like 90% of the way there.
Jonathan, do you have anything to add when it comes to strategies?
Well, yeah, I think the big goal right now, the talk of IT security is zero trust, right? So it's never trust, always verify. That is a very ambiguous 7-pillared module thinking. But you need to start somewhere, right? And if you look at zero trust and look for that goal, you can work your way towards it. So you got to start with something, right? If you aren't using single sign-on with two-factor authentication, start using that. Almost everybody is using that on their own personal work, whether it's Gmail or AOL or whatever they're using. And so that's becoming more common. And passkeys, we won't go down too far into the rabbit hole of different ways to authenticate, but start with the basics of single sign-on. And that, at very least, when an account is compromised, you can shut them out of everything. If a user has an email password, a edit station password, a content management password, a man password, a password to log into their workstation, like that's 6 passwords they need to remember. That you start to get laziness. When their one account is compromised, maybe they can find the other. So single sign-on allows you to shut off an account right away, simplifies the sign-on process. You can start to do cool things with groups so that you just drop someone in an editor group and they all can get access to the edit systems, and you can pull back individual users as needed. And Lee mentioned multi-factor, right? So that's two-step verification. But that's a start, right? Zero trust, though, is the concept around never trust, always verify. Is you know what? You have the credentials and you put in multi-factor, but Phil, you're joining this webinar from Brazil, and you've never joined from Brazil. I'm going to stop you from joining until I can verify that this is actually you. And there could be anything along those lines that fixes that problem. But there's, if you think about that conceptually, you may have remote editors who are editing from their house, right? And or from a Starbucks or from their hotspot. Going to be harder to figure out where they're from. But if it's for a local station and their IP is coming from another state, maybe that's blocking them out, and they have to call IT and say, "Hey, I'm locked out. Yes, I'm actually in Nevada because I just decided to work here today for some reason." So those are some things to think about.
So, we've been talking, Skip, about strategies, but also as media companies, broadcasters consider strategies, I wonder if there's some common things that get overlooked, some common challenges that get overlooked that they should consider when they are trying to come up with how they're going to protect their data.
Well, I mean, here again, it's the data and content, and I think we've kind of ticked off lots of pieces, and for one, it's workflow segregation. I think that Jonathan kind of mentioned. It's like people don't have wide open access. Things are secure and off by default. You ask for exceptions, sort of thing. So it's a post-production house is a pretty good example. You don't want competing superhero movies, and seeing what's going on the other side of the fence, that sort of thing. But I think some of the big ones in production We touched on it a little bit. Is about hybrid, which is, increasingly we'll just sort of describe it as your on-premise where you have superb control over what happens in your environment, and you start folding in and taking advantage of some of the benefits of a public cloud infrastructure. Or, I wouldn't even say public cloud, is this notion of object storage, which has just become this just kind of radically simple and useful way to store things. It's really resilient. It can live on my site and in the cloud. I can bridge the two. And it gives you a couple of benefits, meaning it's like ours, for example, is stored using erasure encoding. I can scale it across multiple systems and be just as performant as primary storage. So one is sort of maybe a shift in how and where you're storing those bits. But another might be kind of like a workflow kind of change. So historically, someone rushes in with media carts. And I've got a media cart, I've got to ingest it as fast as possible. And then I got to give them the media cart back because that thing's a couple $100. It's back out in the field. And now I take that media that only exists in one place and hand it off to people who are going to start doing craft editing and select, stuff like that. Instead, a very simple change would be when I ingest that stuff, archive a copy to your object storage as you do that. So now, maybe that cart fails, or maybe the workstation, SSD drive fails on a creative workstation, and that was the only copy. Nope, you can go right straight to your other copy sitting in object storage. So archive and ingest is really kind of a pivot point. Doesn't add a ton of time, and you get another layer of protection for what's going on in your environment.
Lee, what do you think about? Oh, go right ahead.
Yeah, sorry. If I could just add to that, Skip, once you start doing that, you now have a global read-only copy that maybe marketing could look at, and they could start thinking about how they're going to put marketing material on. You can have production look at it and go, oh, look, that was shot 3 degrees off angle. We need to reshoot that. You can start moving faster because it's not that siloed control, right? Everyone based on your group can have access to it. Lee, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to ask Lee what he sees as some of the frequently overlooked areas when it comes to security measures and new strategies.
Yeah, I think Skip and Jonathan covered most of the big ones. Okay. Nothing's coming to mind.
Lee, you talked about secure shell and secure ports. Do you want to go into a little more about like restricting those ports to only the ones that need to be accessed? That was sort of on my list to reduce the impact.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because basically anything that you're not using is just an extra way that someone can attack you. So if you lock down, like that like most vendors, software vendors will say, we use these ports, we use these ports. So if there's anything other than what the people are specified to use, definitely locking them down is a good way to sort of cut down those vulnerabilities.
But this always shocks me, and sometimes we'll do this for people that are setting up a new studio. I was working with a university customer, and just as a test, they plugged in a new Linux system. And then we're watching, the standard port 22 for SSH, because that's where, all these script kiddies know to look. And it kind of hurts your feelings knowing that there are people who 24/7 are actively trying to like beat down your walls and get inside and learn what they can. And the scale of it is shocking. It is just shocking how many people and where around the world are constantly probing and testing. So, I mean, we were talking about this sort of defense in depth, secure by default, things are off by default. Maybe move those common ports out of port 22 to something else. And, why don't we shut off, FTP, TFTP, and all that stuff. I mean, and I don't have any data on it yet, but the ease that a bad actor can vibe code a scanning or vulnerability scanning to profile your whole organization. I mean, it's this is pretty darn serious, and the stakes are high. I think Jonathan, you talked about, maybe a couple episodes get out early. Well, if it gets bad reviews on a feature film, that means less box office, which is closely, watched, that sort of thing. But other breaches and cyber attacks on broadcast and streamers, it's like that's a reputation hit. And in some cases, if they're a public company, that's a public stock hit that's very measurable.
At some of the JTM tested events, we had some free software, but there's other ones available to basically scan the ports, figure out what's turned on, figure out if you have known vulnerabilities. Because that's the one thing, is that a vulnerability is found, a fix is implemented, and a lot of people don't implement the patches to implement that. And unfortunately, the bad actors, they move quite quickly. So once a new vulnerability is found, you really need to be periodically patching and updating your system so that you close off those holes, because all the bad people, they learn about these very quickly.
And there's the classic, sorry, Phil, there's this classic, my X system is outdated and only runs on Windows 7, which is no longer supported. So I'm just going to turn off internet access to that. But in order to access it to do updates, I have to run a remote desktop, which is running on a different network, which is actually also has a machine that has exposure to an FTP server and so suddenly there is a vector into that system, albeit difficult, that someone could come in and compromise. And I have seen that in the last 20 years, as computers have really started to become, as we've gone from big iron to purpose-built machine to commodity hardware. We've really just seen people say, "Oh, it's too hard to update that. I'm just going to leave it," and it's just sitting out there waiting. And that could be the thing that takes you off the air. And how do you respond to that, right? And so that's I think that's a big thing. And I mentioned this real quick. It's on a different network. A network isolation is really big. Like you should think of network isolation at the very basic level as the different groups, going back to silos, right? Your production control room, A, is its own network. Production control B is its own network, master control, own network of talking about a IP network. And that way, if there's something that happens in that, as silly as it sounds, you can physically disconnect that from the network and it will stop. And you've got it offline, but you've limited your blast radius of where that's going to be impacted. And that could be just as something as a rogue, non-intentionally rogue application that just starts to suck network bandwidth, and suddenly you can no longer, your production switcher, which is on the network to control your frame in the other room, can't communicate because the network's saturated. It's that even that level is something to consider.
Yeah, Phil, Jonathan, Lee, I was thinking about this morning, and so we work with a lot of sports league customers, and when the season is on, it's like, don't talk to them about their storage or this new cool way to use AI with their content, because they're in go mode, but they have a downtime between the seasons where they can say, okay, now we can talk about maybe doing some stuff. And it occurred to me that I think every business probably has these seasonal kind of highs and lows, and and rather than everybody taking a vacation, maybe that's the time to try sandboxing some new technology and do this. I mean, you can call it wargaming, but kind of what if? Netflix calls it chaos engineering. They try and pour in chaos so that they're not as surprised when things go totally sideways, because stuff happens. People miss fat finger stuff or flip something off. And every second of black screen, especially if you're a broadcaster, is a resume generating event. And so it's like the time to test that stuff is when you've got a little bit of a break. Sandbox it, try and break it, and people write plans. And there's a whole bunch of ways to write plans and who does what, and but you've got to test it and then play it back and get comfortable with it. I mean, and that's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, and the one thing there, I mean, it makes sense that most industries have these cyclical nature, But having to wait a whole year to the end of the sports season to be able to try out new patches, new things is a quite a slow cycle. So unfortunately, some of the bad actors move a little bit more than once a year
Yeah.
in there.
Well, as we move into the second half of this webinar, one of the things that I find encouraging so far about what we've talked about, no one's mentioned that the problem with using the word password as your password. And I know several years ago, there were many problems with that. So I think that the SBE and SMPTE and others who've been trying to educate the industry about the importance of security should be commended, because at least we didn't hear that very rudimentary observation. So here we go. Let's move on to broadcasters are in a time of transition, and they're moving away from baseband ecosystem to IP-based ecosystem. So that must have a lot of implications from a security point of view. Lee, what do you think? There must be those implications, and what are some of them?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Now that we're moving into an IP-based ecosystem increasingly in the production and broadcast environment, what new challenges does that raise?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the past when we had SDI was very safe. No one can access it. And I've heard it sort of referred to kind of as a security diode, because you can't go in. And as we now move to more 2110 and IP-based systems, it now, while it's gives us a lot of flexibility and power, it also has a disadvantage now that more and more systems are being connected. So, I mean, many years ago, we had things like you used like analog black burst for your system timing. That was a very hardwired, dedicated system. People couldn't access it. Now that it's moving to PTP and an IP-based system, people can now, it allows much more ways that people can attack the system.
Jonathan probably lived through this, but Phil, a lot of people that build these big shared storage environments. So we've had customers that have been on Fiber Channel, and Fiber Channel is awesome because I can pump a lot of bandwidth through it. It's not very chatty like IP networks, but almost every customer today is finding that they're investing in network, because almost anything I could have done on Fiber Channel yesterday for storage, I can drive using using various protocols directly on IP. So, I mean, you're seeing customers really investing in more and more networking, 100 gig. And in fact, the way it's looking, people are not going to go from 100 to 200 gig to 400. They're going to go straight to 400. So, and if you got a fast network, then, even if they're segregated, they're crossing over somewhere. And I imagine that's where you really need to pay attention.
Jonathan, Skip mentioned it, and you mentioned it earlier. You were involved in this specifically at WWE. Why don't you address the baseband IP transition?
Yeah, so it's hard. It's hard. It's probably easier now than it was when I did that almost 20 years ago. But look, let's take the person side, the operator side out of it, right? They need the same functionality, the same buttons, the same muscle memory, right? Purely from an engineering perspective, as Lee and Skip said, it was isolated. You had an SDI network that you couldn't plug into an IP network. You certainly had IP control. You had storage layer underneath that was IP, but it was usually its own separate system. Maybe you had some sort of FTP or SMB server to share files from corporate to broadcast. Hopefully that was properly secured. It never was, but the concept was there. And with this new world, everything has at least, so it used to be everything had two IPs, right? It had your 2110 IP or a red and a blue ideally, right? But then it still had a control IP, the Ethernet connection. And so you could have 3 or 4 IP connections going into a network. A lot of that that create a lot of extra switches, power consumption, cooling, monitoring. And, I'm starting to see a lot more where it's just like, well, if we're using a red and blue on 2110, we'll just run control on that as well. And that's great. But now you've really got this mix of corporate machines controlling 2110, and it's difficult, right? And there's all these security things we talked about earlier still apply. And how do you limit your blast radius if you have a computer that's running away and sucking? If someone's watching YouTube and Spotify and uploading something, and like that's all taking bandwidth from that device into the edge switch in the facility, into the core. It's all impactful. And yes, Skip, absolutely. The biggest customers are going 100 to 400, but there's still plenty of customers that have 1 gig infrastructure and can easily blow that away with a misroute or a multicast, right? So, and it's harder to troubleshoot this, right? If you had a device that was out of sync before, yeah, you'd go to the back and see if the sync cable is plugged in. Pull out your drawings. Okay, it goes here, and okay, well, look, this whole DA for black is out. Let me replace that. All my problems are solved. It's not the same anymore. And so you need to have networking tools to troubleshoot what devices are online, what ports are constrained. Once you go to that level of network, of software to monitor your network, it's worth the investment to go in to look at intrusion detection, to look at anomaly detection, to look at oversubscription of bandwidth. And once you're starting to look at oversubscription of ports, you can start to identify anomalies. All of those things will help to proactively work on identifying potential vulnerabilities or potential impact on what's happening in your network. But it is, and it's just it's a mental change for the engineers. It's no longer a 1-to-1 ratio. This connector goes to another connector. This connector goes to a switch, which probably fiber trunks to another switch. Maybe it goes to a top of rack to a room, to a core. And every solid diagram, if you've seen a solid 2110 diagram for getting control, you have your A and your Bs, and you've got your X's going across that do full redundancy. That's a lot. Like it's a lot to process that. And if you haven't done that in the past, it's an upskill opportunity. I've met a lot of people. I've been in the business 30 years. You look at the presence of people on this call, and we all have gray hair somewhere. And so we've lived through this. Like, we're the epitome of what broadcast engineering is. And there is a large group of people who have been in this business as long as we have, who are like, no, I can see my retirement, and there is no need for me to learn how to do IP.
I don't need to learn that.
And why do I? And those are hard people to, that is the biggest challenge I've seen by far in any IP transition, is operators fearful of change.
Jonathan, I wanted to ask you, and Lee will weigh in too. It's so we've got all these new systems coming onto IP, and sometimes we'll find that, like, oh, well, this person is handing out IP addresses, and they're in this range. Oh, this person's handing out IP addresses, and they're colliding, and so you want to trace some
Mm-hmm.
really crazy errors, like packet collision, and people are trampling each other's ranges. And I have seen. I mean, we think this networking stuff is kind of bulletproof, but the GBICs, the GBICs and the connectors and control boards on network. It's like I have seen cosmic rays. So I was working at an HPC at the time. There was a big solar event, and we were doing this thing that's probably a useful networking thing. We were testing maximum bisectional bandwidth. So we basically took a cluster of like 1,200 machines, and we push as fast as we could one way, and then we divide it in half and make sure each side matched. And basically, you're trying to flush out traffic slowdowns and bottlenecks. And it'll tell you, oh, that in these 10 machines, you've got a bad GBIC, you got a bad cable, that kind of stuff. But in that solar event, it was really kind of wild because it took up multiple racks, and you could literally trace a cosmic ray and how it took out main boards on a lot of equipment. So, I mean, not only is it people trying to, get your media and slide over into your networks and, scrape your metadata and steal your content. Sometimes Mother Nature doesn't help either. It's you got to invest in that networking knowledge and experience. Yeah.
And that's very true. I mean, some of the things are active malicious attacks, and some
Right.
things are accidental misconfigurations, and then you see some things can be nature. So there's all these things can disrupt your network and your system, but they don't all have to be malicious.
Yeah.
So we have
it's the same troubleshooting and same troubleshooting, same planning, same preparations, same run book, regardless.
Yeah.
You're off air. Figure out do you need to go to a backup? Figure out why, remediate, and fix that. Oh, I forgot to ground the GPS antenna. That's why it got hit that's why it took out my system. I'll ground it this time. So learn your lessons is of course the key outcome.
So we have a question from an audience member, and this kind of gets to something that Skip had mentioned earlier in the presentation. Are there any best practices that you could use to detect whether AI is using your voice that's scraped somewhere from the internet and is being used to spoof the system, to authorize you to log into your personal account or any account for that matter? So can you detect that process is being happening? What steps can you take to prevent that?
So one is a social engineering aspect. Many of these chat engines are real time. So I can, have a pleasant face, someone that looks like, they're answering questions about your account, and it'll respond near real time. But I think people, we're natural, intuitive kind of beings, and you kind of feel something is off. So the social engineering aspect is asking a random question, that sort of thing. But the tools and developing this is really an arms race. One of the most popular open source kind of tools for doing this one-shot voice cloning, meaning I can take a clean snippet of your voice, dump it in, type in text, and it'll spit out something that sounds remarkably like you. Now, they have, the more responsible ones of them actually have a level of audio fingerprinting. And it may be able, if you have a snippet and want to test it, you could uncover that AI footprint. But like most things, there's this counter technology, I'm sure, that's going to say, okay, now I'm going to go in and strip out the, the AI fingerprint. So, I mean, it's an arms race. Yeah, it's a great question.
There's so we don't need to talk about the legitimate ones, right? Because they do tag it. There's C2PA is, if you want to look that up, is a way to tag AI generated content. But I think the crux of the question, I think, is how do we stop this from happening, right? And the answer is one, you can't, but you can remediate, right? So how do I know that the boss is not really asking me to write $1 million check? First of all, he's never done that before. So social engineering flag. Second of all, cool, I'm on it, boss. Hang up the phone and call your boss. Right. It's that simple. Someone says, oh, hey, I'm locked out of my account. Can you log in for me? You know what? I'll call you back. Hang up and just call him back. It's really that simple. Something came out recently, and I won't call out the organization because they solved it, but it was a third-party email about collecting data. And I wrote to the organization and I said, I know what this is about, and this looks really pH fishy. This looks like they're trying to get my data about me. You should have sent out an email ahead of time saying, expect an email from such and such address. This is legitimate. We want you to do that. And I think that the last thing I'll say is just like from a personal side of it, trying to not fearmonger. I have a financial firm that I deal with, and when I call in on my cell phone, it says, hey, I recognize your voice. We're going to go ahead and put your call through. If I call in from another number, it does not do that. So there's that trust but verify again, right? Hey, this sounds like you, and you're calling from a number that you've registered and called from. We're going to assume it's you. They don't. Now, maybe something's terrible has happened and I'm under duress and I'm asking them to move all my money. The automation can't solve that, but it can solve that. You know, that I am who I am based on something I have and something I know.
Yeah.
So, ransomware has impacted the media and entertainment industry in a big way. And I saw one projection that says that ransomware will total losses from it, not just for the media and entertainment space, but in general, globally, will reach $275 billion by 2031. So it's a big deal. What is happening, or what vulnerabilities are there that can be addressed to help media companies protect their valuable content?
Well,
I'll throw it out on the
everyone
table.
should back up to Skip.
Yeah.
Everyone should back up to your systems and then to a third party. I'll let you take that part of it. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things, that one, we're talking about building an overlapping layer of framework. Cyber resilience is a continuous process. It's yes, and doing that pivot point in your workflow where you're backing up, but probably, if you've heard of a data lake, there's also there's this notion of a content lake, and tools like object storage can really start to help give you more options and more, as you start rebuilding and your the kind of workflows and how you want to respond to stuff. But Phil, yeah, the cyberware, there's so many reports. This Hiscox report covered U.S. and EU based customers as well, and it basically says what we all know. It's on the rise. No one is going to be unaffected. So yeah, probably a good idea to plan. And Jonathan and Lee, I mean, I just kind of put together, this kind of notional sort of, it's not even a checklist, but to try and consider how many different layers that it takes. I mean, this is a team sport for sure. You need all different parts of the org, and adopt a lot of different technologies and test them. But each one of these, if I had to give one takeaway, it's that it feels good to write a plan and say, look, you can wave it around and say, here's our plan. And it feels good to test what you want to test. It's like, look, we passed this backup test, and look, I can ingest, I can restore in like X number of minutes. That's great. But beyond testing what you want to test is find that downtime and test what you don't want to test, if you're on the beach and your second in command, are they comfortable with it? So, I mean, so these are just a couple of points. I mean, Jonathan, you live this, and Lee as well.
Yeah, and definitely, as you said on your slide here, like making sure that all your employees are trained, because, I mean, all it takes is one person to slip up and you can have a problem. So you definitely want to make sure everyone's being very vigilant, and definitely, and as you say, try doing a backup, do dry runs to make sure. Yes, I've been backing up my data for years and years, but if you've never actually restored it, you may find that you can't. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great list, Skip, and I think it's actually a good order of operations to go through. But you need to start working on the bottom while you're executing the top, because the bottom three take a long time to do. I don't want to say employees are the problem, because that sounds that's draconian. People are the problem in general, everywhere. People are the problem. It's the phishing attempts. It's the social attempts. It's maybe it's just malicious on purpose. When it's not malicious, when it's someone just is like, hey, I thought this really was the right thing to do, you shouldn't blame the person that did it. It happened. Figure out how to retrain everybody to do proper, to understand these things, move on and raise awareness. I think the biggest thing, though, when it comes to these vulnerabilities that have happened is as companies, we shouldn't be shy about this. This is a lot of people disagree with me, and I respect that opinion, but my feeling is people don't know what they don't know. I said earlier, you're not the most secure person in your facility is the one who's been hacked, the one who's lost your identity because something's happened, because they're aware it's happened. big corporations don't know what happened. Like, oh, so and so had ransomware, terrible for them. I think as an industry, we should be doing after we're remediated, at least among peers, full disclosure. Like, here's what happened. Here was the attack vector. Here's how they did it. Here's what it took to remediate. Here's what the loss was. It cost us X billion to recover Y billion. And if we invested 10% of that early on with a proper DR, direct disaster recovery strategy with proper backups, we could have been like, hey, cool, you ransomwared us. We're just going to buy new machines and back up, and we're good to go, and we'll be back on the air in 24 hours. But instead, it took us, forever, 20 weeks to do it. I think if people are more open about that, and there's not a stigma about it, it's going to help everyone in the industry. And it has happened to every major company, whether you know about it or not. Every major company has been compromised in one way or another. Some are more prepared, and they take that system offline and they move on. And some take a very, very long time to come back and realize it. And some just take a loss. Like, if you lose a movie because it's been released in the public before it was ready, you might just cut your loss on that and move on. But I think it's important to share.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to measure reputation. How do you put a price on, on reputation hit? It's like people stop advertising so much with you. People don't go to that movie because it looks, Jonathan, I wanted to ask, and I'm sure Lee and Phil have an idea too. You mentioned this really interesting concept about kind of blast radius, and one, it's like, it's not a zero defect mentality, but more of a resilience. Like, okay, if that happens, then how do we at least limit it so it doesn't like cross networks or something like that? That's kind of a cool concept. I think we'll have to maybe verbalize and outline that a little better, unless you have some best practices.
So it's a common term within AWS, Amazon Web Services, and it's how you talk about building out virtual private connections, VPCs, and networks. But the core of it is, conceptually, if something is happening in one part of your facility, think of it as literal firewalls, not IT firewalls, but a physical firewall between your core rack room and the rest of the facility, right? That rack room is firewalled, so if something happens in there, no fire will get out, or vice versa. It has a dry sprinkler system, and so on. You've done everything you can to make sure that system stays online no matter what. And in your tape library, right, it's got a Halon system that has, it's going to keep everything the same. Take that concept and move it to the network world, where if something happens over here, it's contained. Whether that's physically unplugging a network for a denial of service attack, or it's port blocking, or there's authentication that has to occur every time a transaction happens. Whatever that is, it limits the blast of a vulnerability or a mistake to just that area. And that mistake could be like, hey, maybe every storage system has a different mechanism for deleting. So that if someone does remove ***, right, it only does it on the one system they're on and doesn't do it on the disaster recovery backup system. Those are all blast radius concepts.
Nice.
Okay, we are coming close to the end. There's enough time to give everyone a minute or two to summarize. So why don't we go around the horn? Jonathan, let's start with you.
I think my closing comments here is do something, right? Everyone on this webinar has power to do something to help improve security. And it could be just going online, watching a 1-hour session on how to have better password strategy and sharing it out with all your peers. Anytime there is something that causes you to need to be resilient or need to be reactive to a security incident, you are the weakest, not you personally, but your network is the weakest link. It's because they couldn't do it on someone else's. So every little bit you do to keep someone from coming in or keep a problem from happening on your infrastructure means that attacker is going somewhere else.
Lee, what are your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely sort of have to have a plan. You need to take this seriously. And there's a lot of sort of very simple things that you can do. Strong passwords, use HTTPS instead of HTTP. Just there's a lot of basics which will go a long way in protecting you. And as Jonathan was saying, I mean, you want to make sure you're not the weakest link, the weakest company, because that's who will get attacked. You just want to sort of make yourself a bit stronger. It doesn't take a lot of effort to get that 90%. Maybe against the most sophisticated attackers, you're not protected, but you can do lots of simple things which will protect you against most things, and against the accidental, non-malicious attacks too.
Skip, final thoughts?
Oh, just I mean, how to follow up that? I mean, thinking in workflows, thinking in total workflows, and a system of systems, and and stacking, stacking plans is kind of my favorite thing, because in a way it almost becomes like this sort of living and growing organization that the needs the needs for speeds and feeds is changing. Well, a system that's very rigid is gonna break, but a system that's a lot more flexible and you're thinking in terms of whole workflows, how systems work together. And then I think, as Jonathan mentioned, that investing in that curiosity about, well, what's this new technology, and what if we tried that, and how far can we push that in a safe sandbox, and then now let's test it in a semi-real term environment, because nothing stays the same. There's a new threat actor of the day. There's a new kind of crazy thing we got to deal with. So yeah, workflows and systems, and making all your cool technologies, storage, network, whatever, work together.
Okay, well, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank our panelists, Jonathan Solomon, Lee Wickham, and Skip Levins, for sharing their insights on security and disaster recovery. I also want to thank you for attending and remind you to download the resources that the panelists have shared. And finally, I'd like to remind you to visit tvtech.com to find my latest articles and those of all my colleagues. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Super cool.